Hello and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time we will continue our reading of Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling. Last time we had a story concerning smugglers sneaking about and hiding their goods in among the farms. So we begin tonight with A Smuggler's Song. If you wake at midnight and hear a horse's feet, don't go drawing back the blind or looking in the street. Them that asks no questions isn't told a lie. Watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. 25 ponies trotting through the dark, brandy for the parson, baccy for the clerk, laces for a lady, letters for a spy. And watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. Running round the wood lump, if you chance to find little barrels roped and tarred, all full of brandy wine, don't you shout to come and look, nor take 'em for your play. Put the brushwood back again, and they'll be gone next day. If you see the stable yard settin' open wide, if you see a tired horse lying down inside, if your mother mends a coat cut about and tore, if the lining's wet and warm, don't you ask no more. If you meet King George's men dressed in blue and red, you be careful what you say and mindful what is said. If they call you pretty maid and chuck you 'neath the chin, don't you tell where no one is, nor yet where no one's been. Knocks and footsteps round the house, whistles after dark. You've no call for running out till the house dogs bark. Trustees here and pinchers here, and see how dumb they lie. They don't fret to follow when the gentlemen go by. If you do as you've been told, likely there's a chance you'll be give a dainty doll all the way from France, with a cap of valencenses and a velvet hood, a present from the gentleman, along of being good. 25 ponies trotting through the dark, brandy for the parson, baccy for the clerk. Them that asks no questions isn't told a lie. Watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by. Dymchurch Flit. The Bee-Boy's Song. Bees, bees, hark to your bees, hide from your neighbors as much as you please, but all that has happened to us you must tell, or else we'll give you no honey to sell. A maiden in her glory upon her wedding day must tell the bees her story, or else they'll fly away, die away, dwindle down and leave you. But if you don't deceive your bees will not deceive you. Marriage, birth, or burying, news across the seas, all you're sad or merryin', you must tell the bees. Tell 'em coming in and out where the fanners fan, 'cause the bees are just about as curious as a man. Don't you wait where trees are when the lightning play. Don't you hate where bees are, or else they'll pine away. Pine away, dwine away, anything to leave you. But if you never grieve your bees will never grieve you. Just at dusk, a soft September rain began to fall on the hop pickers. The mothers wheeled the bouncing perambulators out of the gardens, bins were put away, and tally books were made up. The young couples strolled home, two to each umbrella, and the single men walked behind them, laughing. Dan and Una, who had been picking after their lessons, marched off to roast potatoes at the Oast House, where old Hobden, with Blue-Eyed Bess, his lurcher dog, lived all the month through, drying the hops. They settled themselves, as usual, on the sack-strewn cot in front of the fire, and when Hobden drew up the shutter, stared, as usual, at the flameless bed of coals, spouting its heat up the dark well of the old-fashioned roundel. Slowly he cracked off a few fresh pieces of coal, packed them with fingers that never flinched exactly where they would do most good. Slowly he reached behind him till Dan tilted the potatoes into his iron scoop of a hand. Carefully he arranged them round the fire, then stood for a moment, black against the glare. As he closed the shutter, the Oast House seemed dark before the day's end, and he lit the candle and the lantern. The children liked all these things because they knew them so well. The bee-boy, Hobden's son, who is not quite right in the head, though he could do anything with bees, slipped in like a shadow. They only guessed it when Bess's stump tail wagged against them. A big voice began singing out in the drizzle. Old Mother Ladenwool, nigh 12 months had been dead. She heard the hops were doing well and then popped up her head. There can't be two people made to holler like that, cried old Hobden, wheeling round. For, says she, the boys I've picked with when I was young and fair, they're bound to be at hoppin', and I'm— A man showed in the doorway. Well, well, they do say hoppin'll draw the very deadest, and now I believed 'em. You Tom Shoesmith? Hobden lowered his lantern. You a hem of a time making your mind up to it, Ralph. The stranger strode in, 3 full inches taller than Hobden, a gray-whiskered, brown-faced giant with clear blue eyes. They shook hands, and the children could hear the hard palms rasp together. You ain't lost none of your grip, said Hobden. Was it 30 or 40 years back you broke my head at Peasmarsh Fair? Only 30, and no odds between us regarding heads, neither. You had it back at me with a hop pole. How did we get home that night? Swimming? Same way the peasant come into Gubb's pocket, by a little luck and a deal of conjuring. Old Hobden laughed in his deep chest. I see you've not forgot your way around the woods. Do you do any of this still? The stranger pretended to look along a gun. Hobden answered with a quick movement of the hand as though he were pegging down a rabbit wire. No, that's all that's left me now. Age she must as age she can. And what's your news since all these years? Oh, I been to Plymouth, I been to Dover, I been ramblin', boys, the wide world over, the man answered cheerfully. I reckon I know as much of old England as most, and he turned toward the children and winked boldly. I lay they told you a sight of lies then. I been into England as fur as Wiltshire once. I was cheated proper over a pair of hedging gloves, said Hobden. There's fancy talk everywhere. You've cleaved to your own parts pretty middlin' close, Ralph. Can't shift an old tree without it dyin', Hobden chuckled. And I be no more anxious to die than you look to be to help me with my hops tonight. The great man leaned against the brickwork of the roundel and swung his arms abroad. Hire me, was all he said, and they stumped upstairs laughing. The children heard their shovels rasp on the cloth where the yellow hops lie drying above the fires, and all the oast house filled with the sweet, sleepy smell as they returned. Who is it? Una whispered to the bee-boy. Dunno more'n you, if you don't know, said he, and smiled. The voices on the drying floor talked and chuckled together, and the heavy footsteps moved back and forth. Presently a hop pocket dropped through the press hole overhead and stiffened and fattened as they shoveled it full. Clank went the press and rammed the loose stuff into a tight cake. Gentle, they heard Hobden cry, you'll bust your crop if you lay on so. You be as careless as Gleason's bull, Tom. Come and sit by the fire, she'll do now. They came down, and as Hobden opened the shutter to see if the potatoes were done, Tom Shoesmith said to the children, Put plenty of salt on 'em. That'll show you the sort I be. And he winked again, and again the bee-boy laughed, and Una stared at Dan. I know what sort of man you be, old Hobden grunted, groping for the potatoes round the fire. Do ye? Tom went on behind his back. Some of us can't abide horseshoes, or church bells, or running water. And talking of running water, he turned to Hobden, who was backing out of the roundel. Do you mind the great floods at Robert's Bridge when the miller's man was drowned in the street? Middlin' well, old Hobden let himself down on the coals by the fire door. I was courting my woman on the marsh that year. Carter to Mr. Plum I was, getting 10 shillings a week. Mine was a marsh woman. Wonderful odd gates place, Romney Marsh, said Tom Shoesmith. I've heard say the world's divided like into Europe, Asia, Africa, America, Australia, and Romney Marsh. The marsh folk think so, said Hobden. I had a hem of trouble getting my woman to leave it. Where'd she come out of? I forget, Ralph. Dymchurch under the wall, Hobden answered, a potato in his hand. Then she'd be a pet, or a Whitgift, would she be? Whitgift. Hobden broke open the potato and ate it with the curious neatness of men who make most of their meals in the blowy open. She growed to be quite reasonable like after living in the Weald a while, but our first 20 years or two she was old-fashioned, no bounds, and she was a wonderful hand with bees." He cut away a little piece of potato and threw it out the door. "Ah, I've heard say the Whitgifts could see further through a millstone than most," said Shoesmith. "Did she now?" "She was honest innocent of any nigromancin'," said Hobden, "only she read signs and significations out of birds flyin', stars fallin', bees hivin', and such, and she'd lie awake listenin' for calls, she said." "That don't prove naught," said Tom. "All marsh folk have been smugglers since time everlastin'. 'Twould be in her blood to listen out o' nights." "Naturally," old Tom replied, smiling. "I mind when there was smugglin' a sight nearer us than marsh be. But that wasn't my woman's trouble. 'Twas a passel of no-sense talk," he dropped his voice, "about Pharisees." "Yes, I've heard marshmen believed in 'em." Tom looked straight at the wide-eyed children beside Bess. "Pharisees?" cried Una. "Fairies? Oh, I see." "People of the hills," said the bee-boy, throwing half of his potato toward the door. "There you be," said Hobden, pointing at him. "My boy, he has her eyes and her outgate senses. That's what she called 'em." "And what do you think of it all?" Hobden rumbled. "A man that uses fields and shaws after dark as much as I done, he don't go out of his road except for keepers." "But setting that aside," said Tom coaxingly, "I saw you throw the good piece out the door just now. Do you believe, or do you?" "There's a great black eye to that tater," said Hobden indignantly. "My little eye didn't see him then. Looked as if you meant it for anyone as might need it. But setting that aside, do you believe, or do you?" "I ain't saying nothing, 'cause I've heard naught and I've seen naught. But if you was to say there was more things after dark in the shaws than men or fur or feathers or fin, I don't know that I'd go about to call you a liar. Now turn again, Tom. What's your say?" "I'm like you. I say nothing. But I'll tell you a tale, and you can fit it as how you please." "Passel no-sense stuff," growled Hobden, but he filled his pipe. "The marshmen, they call it Dymchurch Flit," Tom went on slowly. "Hap you've heard of it?" "My woman, she've told me score of times. Dunno as I didn't end believin' it sometimes." Hobden crossed over as he spoke and sucked with his pipe at the yellow lantern flame. Tom rested one great elbow on one great knee where he sat among the coals. "Have you ever been in the marsh?" he asked to Dan. "Only as far as Rye once," Dan answered. "Ah, that's but the edge. Back behind of her there's steeples set beside churches, and wise women settin' beside their doors, and the sea settin' above the land, and ducks herdin' wild in the dikes. And marsh is just about riddled with dikes and sluices and tide gates and waterlets. You can hear 'em bubblin' and grummelin' when the tide works in 'em, and then you hear the sea rangin' left and right-handed all up along the wall. You've seen how flat she is, the marsh. Do you think nothing easier than to walk end-on across her? Ah, but the dikes and the waterlets, they twist the roads around as ravelly as witch yarn on the spindles, so you gets all turned round in broad daylight." "That's 'cause they've drained the waters into the dikes," said Hobden. "When I courted my woman, the rushes was green. Me, the rushes was green, and the bailiff of the marshes, he rode up and down as free as the fog." "Who was he?" said Dan. "Why, the marsh fever and ague. He've clapped me on the shoulder once or twice till I shook proper. But now the drainin' off of the waters have done away with the fevers, so they make a joke like that the bailiff of the marshes broke his neck in the dike. Wonderful place for bees and ducks, 'tis too." "And old," Tom went on. "Flesh and blood have been there since time everlasting beyond. Well, now speaking among themselves, the marshmen say that from time everlasting beyond, the Pharisees favored the marsh above the rest of old England. I lay the marshmen ought to know. They've been out after dark, father and son, smuggling one thing or t'other, ever since wool grew on sheep's backs. They say there was always a middlin' few Pharisees to be seen on the marsh. Impudent as rabbits, they was. They'd dance on the naked roads in the naked daytime, They'd flash their little green lights along the dikes, coming and going like honest smugglers. Yes, at times they'd lock the church doors against parson and clerk of Sundays. That'd be smugglers laying in the lace or the brandy till they could run it out of the marsh. I told my woman so, said Hobden. I'll lay she didn't believe it then, not if she was a Whitgift. A wonderful choice place for fairies is the marsh, but all accounts but 'tis Queen Bess's father, he come in with his reformatories. Would that be an act of Parliament like? Hobden asked. Surely, can't do nothing in old England without act, warrant, and summons. He got his act allowing him, and they say Queen Bess's father he used the parish church as something shameful, just about tore the gizzards out of I done a many. Some folk in England they held with him, and some they saw it different, and it ended in him taking sides and burning each other, no bounds according to which side was top time being. That terrified the Pharisees, for goodwill among flesh and blood is meat and drink to them, and ill will is poison. Same as bees, said the bee-boy. Bees won't stay by a house where there's hating. True, said Tom. The Reformations terrified the Pharisees, same as reaping going round the last stand of wheat terrifies rabbits. They packed up into the marsh from all parts, and they says, fair or foul, we must flit out of this, for merry England's done with, and we're reckoned among the images. Did they all see it that way? Said Hobden. All but one that was called Robin, if you've heard of him. What are you laughing at? Said Tom, turning to Dan. The Pharisees' trouble didn't tetch Robin, 'cause he'd cleaved fast to people like. No more he never meant to go out of old England, not he. So he was sent messaging among help for flesh and blood, but flesh and blood must always think of their own concerns, and Robin couldn't get through to him, see? They thought it was tide echoes off the marsh. What did the Pharisees want? Una asked. A boat, to be sure. Their little wings could no more cross channel than so many tired butterflies. A boat and a crew they desired to sail them over to France, while yet a while folks hadn't tore down the images. They couldn't abide cruel Canterbury bells ringing to Bulverhithe for more poor men and women to be burned, nor the king's proud messenger riding through the land giving orders to tear down the images. They couldn't abide it no shape, nor they couldn't yet get their boat and crew to flit by without leaving goodwill from flesh and blood. And flesh and blood came and went about its own business, while the marsh was swarving up, with Pharisees from all England over, striving all means to get through to flesh and blood, and tell them their sore need. I don't know you've ever heard say Pharisees are like chickens? My woman used to say that too, said Hobden, folding his brown arms. They be. You run too many chickens together, and the ground sickens like, and you get a squat, and your chickens die. Same way you crowd Pharisees all in one place. They don't die, but flesh and blood walking among 'em is apt to sicken and pine off. They don't mean it, and flesh and blood don't know it, but that's the truth, as I've heard. The Pharisees be being all strenched up and frightened and trying to come through with their supplications. They naturally change the thin airs and humors in flesh and blood. It lay on the marsh like thunder. Men saw their churches ablaze with wildfire in the windows after dark. They saw their cattle scattering and no man scaring, their sheep flocking and no man driving, their horses lathering and no man leading. They saw the little low green lights more than ever in the dike sides. They heard little feet pattering more than ever round the houses, and night and day, 'twas as though they was being creeped up on and hinted at by someone or other that couldn't rightly shape their trouble. Oh, I lay they sweated. Man and maid, woman and child, their nature done 'em no service all the weeks while the marsh was swarving up with Pharisees. But they was flesh and blood, and marshmen before all. They reckoned the signs signified trouble for the marsh, or that the sea'd rear up against Dymchurch wall and they'd be drowned like old Winchelsea, or that the plague was coming. So they looked for the meaning in the sea or in the clouds, far and high up. They never thought to look near and knee-high where they could see naught. Now, there was a poor widow at Dymchurch under the wall, which lacking man or property she had the more time for feeling. And she come to feel there was a trouble outside her doorstep, bigger and heavier than aught she'd ever carried over it. She had 2 sons, one born blind and t'other struck dumb through falling off the wall when he was little. They was men grown, but not wage earnin', and she worked for 'em, keepin' bees and answerin' questions. What sort of questions? Asked Anne. Like where lost things might be found, and what to put about a crooked baby's neck, and how to join parted sweethearts. She felt the trouble on the marsh as eels feel thunder. She was a wise woman. My woman was wonderful weather tender, too, said Hobden. I've seen her brush sparks like off an anvil out of her hair in thunderstorms, but she never laid out to answer questions. This woman was a seeker, and like seekers they sometimes find. One night, while she lay abed, hot and aching, there come a dream tapping at her window, and "Widow Whitgift," it said, "Widow Whitgift." First, by the wings and the whistling, she thought it was peewits, but last she arose and dressed herself and opened her door to the marsh, and she felt the trouble and the groaning all about her, strong as fever and ague, and she calls, "What is it? Oh, what is it?" 'Twas then like all the frogs in the dikes peepin', then 'twas like all the reeds in the dikes clip-clappin', and then the great tide wave rummelin' along the wall, and she couldn't hear proper. 3 times she called, and 3 times the tide wave did her down. But she catched the quiet between, and she cries out, "What is this trouble on the marsh that's been lying down with my heart and arising with my body this month gone?" She felt a little hand lay hold of her gown hem, and she stooped to pull on that little hand. Shoesmith spread his huge fist before the fire and smiled at it. "Will the sea drown the marsh?" she says. She was a marsh woman first and foremost. "No," says the little voice. "Sleep sound for all of that." "Is the plague comin' to the marsh?" she says. Them was all the ills she knowed. "No, sleep sound for all of that," says Robin. She turned around half mindful to go, but the little voices grieved that shrilled and that's so sorrowful, and she turns back and she cries, "If it is not a trouble of flesh and blood, what can I do?" The Pharisees cried out upon her from all round to fetch them a boat to sail to France and come back no more. "There's a boat on the wall," she says, "but I can't push it down to the sea, nor sail it when 'tis there." "Lend us your sons," says all the Pharisees. "Give 'em leave and goodwill to sail it for us, mother, oh mother." "One's dumb and t'other's blind," she says, "but all the dearer to me for that, and you'll lose 'em in the big sea." The voices just about pierced through her, and there was children's voices too. She stood out all she could, but she couldn't rightly stand against that. So she says, "If you can draw my sons for your job, I'll not hinder 'em. You can ask no more of a mother." She saw them little green lights dance and cross till she was dizzy. She heard them little feet pattering by the thousand. She heard cruel Canterbury bells ringing to Bulverhythe, and she heard the great tide wave ranging along the wall. That was while the Pharisees was working a dream to wake her 2 sons asleep, and while she bit on her fingers, she saw the 2 she'd bore come out and pass her with never a word. She followed 'em, crying pitiful, down to the old boat on the wall, and that they took and run down to the sea. When they stepped at mast and sail, the blind son speaks, "Mother, we're waiting your leave and goodwill to take them over." Tom Shoesmith threw back his head and half shut his eyes. "Amy," he said, "she was a fine, valiant woman, the widow Whitgift. She stood twisting the ends of her long hair over her fingers, and she shook like a poplar, making up her mind. The Pharisees all about, they hushed their children from crying, and they waited dumb still. She was all their dependence. Without her leave and goodwill they could not pass, for she was the mother. So she shook like an apple tree, making up her mind. Last she drives the words past her teeth, and 'Go,' she says, 'go with my leave and goodwill.' Then she had to brace about the same as if she was wading in tide water, for the Pharisees just about flowed past her down the beach to the boat. I done a many of 'em, with their wives and children and valuables all escaping out of cruel old England. Silver you could hear clinking, and little bundles hove down at the bottom boards, and passels of little swords and shields rakelin, and little fingers and toes scratching on the boat side to board her when the two sons pushed her off. That boat she sunk lower and lower, but all the widow could see in it was her boys moving hampered like to get at the tackle. Up sail they did, and away they went, deep as a rye barge, away off the offshore mists. And the widow Whitgift, she sat down and eased her grief till morning light. I never heard she was all alone, said Hobden. I remember now, the one called Robin, he stayed with her, they tell. She was all too grievous to listen to his promises. Ah, she should have made her bargain aforehand. I always told my woman so, Hobden cried. No, she loaned her sons for a pure love loan, being as she sensed the trouble on the marshes, and was simple good-willin' to ease it. Tom laughed softly. She done that. Yes, she done that. From Hythe to Boulder Hythe, Freddy man and petty maid, ailin' woman and wailin' child, they took the advantage of the change in the thin airs just about as soon as the Pharisees flitted. Folks come out fresh and shinin' all over the marsh like snails after wet. And that while the widow Whitgift sat grievin' on the wall. She might have believed us. She might have trusted her sons would be sent back. She fussed no bounds when their boat come in after 3 days. And of course her sons were both quite cured, said Una. No, that would have been out of nature. She got him back as she sent him. The blind man, he hadn't seen naught of anything, and the dumb man naturally couldn't say aught of what he'd seen. I reckon that was why the Pharisees pitched on him for the ferrying job. But what about you? What did Robin promise the widow? Said Dan. What did he promise now? Tom pretended to think. Wasn't your woman a Whitgift, Ralph? Didn't she ever say? She told me a passel of no-sense stuff when he was born, Hobden pointed at his son. There was always to be one of 'em that could see further into a millstone than most. Me, that's me, said the bee-boy so suddenly they all laughed. I got it now, cried Tom, slapping his knee. So long as Whitgift blood lasted, Robin promised, there'd always be one of her stock that no trouble would lie on, no maiden would sigh on, no night could frighten, no fright could harm, no harm could make sin, and no woman would be made a fool of. Well, that ain't that just me, said the bee-boy, where he sat in the silver square of the great September moon that was staring into the oast house door. They was the exact words she told me when we first found he wasn't like others, but it beats me how you know him, said Hobden. Ah, there's more under my hat than hair, Tom laughed and stretched himself. When I've seen these two young folk home, we'll make a night of old days, Ralph, with passin' old tales, eh? Where might you live? He said gravely to Dan. And do you think your pa'd give me a drink for taking you there, missy? They giggled so at this they had to run out. Tom picked them both up, set one on each broad shoulder, and tramped across the ferny pasture where the cows puffed milky puffs at them in the moonlight. Oh, Puck, I guess from when you talked about the salt. How could you ever do it? Una cried, swinging along delighted. Do what? He said, and climbed the stile by the pollard oak. Pretend to be Tom Shoesmith, said Dan, and they ducked to avoid 2 little ashes growing by the bridge over the brook. Tom was almost running. Yes, that's my name, Master Dan, he said, hurrying over the silent shining lawn, where a rabbit sat by the big whitethorn near their croquet ground. Here you be. He strode into the old kitchen garden and slid them down as Ellen came to ask questions. I'm helping Master Spray's oast house, he said to her. I'm no foreigner. I know this country 'fore your mother was born. And yes, it's a dry work, oastin', miss. Thank you. Ellen went to get a jug, and the children went in, magicked once more by oak and ash and thorn. Another story next time.